Three, two, one, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian the Rainman Lucas. Welcome to Rainman's Take, observations on the world we live in. We're going to take a deeper dive into topics of interest to me, including politics, current events, history, popular culture, and social issues. You'll find the diversity of topics refreshing. In our clickbait, soundbite society, we rarely get the whole story. Rainman's Take interviews interesting people as well as peeling back the onion on specific topics, all with the goal of getting people to think more deeply about a subject. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. I want to introduce my guest, Janet Sitchin. Janet, how you doing today?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well. Thanks very much for joining us. So the reason why I wanted to have Janet on, and if there's anybody out there that is the questioning type or the not believe everything you hear type, and you want to dig kind of deeper into various issues, the Sitchin name may ring a bell. And if it does, that's because Janet is Zacharia Sitchin's niece. She currently runs and kind of controls all of the resources associated with Zacharia Sitchin in his website, and we'll pass it on here in a second. And it's I have her on because I'm just fascinated by him. I'm fascinated about the research he did while he was alive. Well, I'm sure we'll go into that a little bit more during our conversation, but I'm very excited to have you on, Janet. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you.
Why don't we go ahead and start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Zacharia, the official website for Zacharia Sitchin, and then kind of we'll go into his life and how he got to being as prominent as he was in the studies of ancient civilizations.
Okay, so my study is in computer science, and I work for a data management software company as a professional services consultant who goes to our clients and helps them with projects. In my spare time, I work on the Sitchin.com website for Zacharia. While he was alive, he used to give me articles to post about once a month. The website has been less active since he passed away. I try to find some articles of interest, but a lot of it depends on my availability, and sometimes that's not so great. So the website probably could be more than it is, but at least I do try to keep readers up to date on if there's any new publication or anything of major interest that comes out. So that's kind of where we are now with that work. There's also a group of family members that control some of the his content and legacy, and we're doing what we can to try to keep his name out there and promote his ideas. And keep that alive, because there is so much in what he's put together that has just been amazing content, and it's stood the test of time. I mean, there are people that maybe don't believe it and want to naysay, but nobody legitimate has really said it's not true. And what he said, there are people maybe who are afraid to speak up, but there's nobody who's really been in a position to know things who said no, that's not so.
Yeah. And before you get into a little bit about Zachariah's life and his work, let me just get it out there right now if anybody is not knowing what we're talking about. But he's famous for probably the most famous book he wrote was The 12th Planet. And then from there, all of his research into ancient Sumerian culture, ancient Babylonian, Akkadian, Assyrian cultures, and how a lot of their stories were precursors to the Old Testament, the Bible, that obviously everybody knows about, but it goes beyond that. And so from his 12th Planet book, he actually wrote a series, and it's called the Earth Chronicles. So those are the major works that he was writing about. And then from there, he also would do tours into some of these areas while he was alive. So we'll definitely get into that. But suffice to say, he's kind of and maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, Janet, but he's kind of the original ancient alien theorist. Would that be pretty accurate? And then from there, obviously, it stemmed everything that we see nowadays.
Right. So my uncle was prompted to research this by some things that he read in the original Bible as a child. And so he started looking at some of the things he was reading, ancient documents, myths, and everything else, and saying, you know, what if these aren't myths? What if they're history? And that's where he took it from. So he was researching this for really his entire life. And Eric von Daniken actually did publish his book Chariots of the Gods before my uncle had a chance to publish The 12th Planet. So I think both of them are probably, you know, leaders in this field. But I would say that my uncle took a very scholarly approach, and that's a part of why it took a while for the book to come out, and maybe why the other book, which was maybe a little easier to read as a first entree into this, was a little more of a success as far as, I mean, not that The 12th Planet isn't, it's amazing that even when it was published in 1976, it's still in publication, and it's very unusual for a book to be in publication for this amount of time and still have reprints and everything else, and it's been published in 30 or more languages by this time.
Yeah, and what I find fascinating is, you know, Eric von Daniken, you know, kind of seems like he's the godfather of the whole ancient alien movement, and his books were soundly debunked by the sort of the mainstream scientists and researchers at the time. And yet, you know, the book, if you've ever read it, it just is asking questions. It's asking questions that a normal person would ask if you've ever been to some of these places. And so that kind of gets people thinking about those sorts of things. And then you throw down, you know, The 12th Planet, and you start to get into some pretty serious research. So when did he decide, okay, I'm going to do a serious research project to come up with The 12th Planet? What was do you kind of know what his thought process was?
So what initially occurred when he was a child, he grew up in Israel. He was born in Baku, which was, was the Soviet Union, but it's Azerbaijan today. And when he was 5 years old, the family moved to Tel Aviv in Israel. So it was actually still it wasn't Israel yet. It was the British Mandate. And he was studying the Bible in school. I think he was probably maybe around 10, 11, 14 at the oldest. And there was a section in Genesis 6, and it's translated in English as, and there were giants upon the earth then and also afterwards. So he asked the teacher, why is this word translated as giants when it comes from the word is Nephilim, and it comes from the root word in Hebrew Nephal, which it's very important, kind of Hebrew root words are really important to understand the language. So he asked the teacher, it comes from the root word Nephal, which means to fall or to come down. So, you know, why giants? And the teacher, instead of praising him for knowing his Hebrew root words, said, sit down, this is the Bible and we don't question it. And that was devastating. He was, you know, he was very bright, even then, of course, you know, but, and this was really crushing for him. And it's also not very Jewish, because in Judaism we question everything. It's something we're asked to question. We're not supposed to believe rote. We're supposed to question. Right. So it was pretty devastating for him to get that kind of a reply from the teacher when he was expecting praise. And so he started wondering, well, who are the Nephilim? And there were also other parts of Genesis in that same section that are very enigmatic. There's a section right above it that talks about the sons of the gods saw the daughters of man, that they were fair and they took them unto themselves as wives, and the offspring were the men of renown. So why are the sons of God different from the daughters of man? So that was kind of, and the word for fair also translates, it has a nuance of meaning compatible, and my uncle felt that might have meant genetically compatible, so that they were able to breed between if the sons of God were the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, which is the word in Sumerian and what it means, and they saw the daughters of the Adam, which were basically the humans that were on earth at the time. So he started looking at these passages, and of course, what I just explained has a lot to do with answers that he's found along the way. but he wondered what's going on here. What do these things really mean? And if they're not simile and analogy and all kinds of other things, myths, if they're history, then where did they come from and what does it mean? And he started looking at documents in Hebrew, which he already knew. And it was very easy for him, knowing Hebrew, which is a Semitic language, to learn some of the other languages of the Near East, including the ancient Near East. He learned how to read cuneiform, in Sumerian cuneiform and Babylonian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphics and a lot of these other ancient writings, so that he could read these documents himself. And one of the things he really thought was important is to be able to read them and interpret them himself, because when they're translated with the worldview of the translator. So if you are in 1910 and you're translating a document that describes a rocket, you don't have something to imagine a rocket and to call it a rocket, or to talk about airplanes or helicopters, or maybe even something that might be like our smartphones. All kinds of technology, you don't have the ability to translate those words, and even simpler concepts than that aren't as advanced as we are today. So if you're reading something and it's describing something like that, it's dependent on the translator. And so he really wanted to be able to read those languages himself and interpret them for himself. And that's part of the difference. There are two things that are different. One is him looking at these things that are myths, or stories, or fantasies or whatever of ancient people, and saying, what if they're history? And the other one is trying to interpret things that may have been translated previously and interpret it with that in mind, and with more of a modern position in mind.
Yeah. And I'll just kind of go back here and kind of give a little bit of the reason why I'm so interested in it. And again, for all of you out there, believe it or not, that's entirely up to you. The people that I'm hoping that get something out of this particular interview is the people that are open to questioning kind of what the mainstream and what they've been told. And kind of for me, what really got me going, and everybody who's listened to my podcast before know this already, but I did 2 tours of duty over in Iraq in 2004 and 2005, flying helicopters during the war there. And actually come to find out, and I've got a great picture of it, and this always fascinated me, but I literally flew one day over one of the ancient ruins of one of the ziggurats out in the middle of the desert. Now, it's not the famous one, or up in Mosul, where some of the real famous ones are, but this one was just a random one out in the desert. So that caught my attention, one. And then two, I read the Bible on my way over to war, as you can probably imagine. I probably wanted to catch up on that just in case. But a lot of things in there, just when you first read it, and I grew up Roman Catholic, didn't really pay attention much in church or in Sunday school. So when you read something like, when Noah died, he was something like 900 years old, I just kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then that kind of just tainted my sort of vision of the rest of the story in Genesis. And so when I got back, very skeptical of the war, of kind of how it was being portrayed in the news and the mainstream, I started thinking and questioning everything. And that just happened to be one of them. It started questioning sort of the religious aspect of it, but eventually it leads you to people like Van Daniken and Zacharia Sitchin, because at the very least, everybody needs to accept the fact that the Bible wasn't just written in a vacuum. They took stories from cultures thousands of years before them to actually put those stories together. And so, like we're going to talk about here, in the ancient Sumerian cuneiforms, they have the creation tale, the Genesis, that is pretty similar. They've got the flood tale. It's very similar to the Bible. So you basically, the more you look into it, and the more you look at books that maybe weren't in the Bible, like the book of Enoch and others, you start to realize that there's a heck of a lot more to the story. And the more you learn about what came before them, then you really start to think about it. So how did Zacharia, once he made that commitment, hey, I'd like to learn about this, I mean, where did he go to learn how to read the cuneiform tablets that the Sumerians produced? How did that all happen?
So he taught himself. I mean, there was no internet at the time that he started all of this, and he traveled all over the world to different libraries and studied and had books. He had a whole library in his home in New York with all kinds of books on all of the related topics to this. So he taught himself how to read those other languages. And I guess I never really answered your other question about, how did he start all of this? So he started with that interest when he was a child, and it really became a lifelong passion to try to learn as much as he could and to visit those places and to start studying this. So he was studying this his entire life and talking about it with his wife, Rena, my aunt. And he finally, she said, stop talking, start writing. And that's when he started thinking about writing books and started writing The 12th Planet. So that's kind of how it began, but it was a lifelong passion and a lifelong study. He went to university in London at the London School of Economics. So when he was there, he went to the British Museum. He went everywhere he could to find out information. And of course, when he started his career, he was able to travel more and go to these places with a little more flexibility than he had as a young man, but to learn all of this, to see for himself.
As I was doing some research, because that's kind of, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, as somebody who is questioning all of this stuff and is open to all of this stuff, one of the biggest, when I was kind of researching not only Zacharia, but some of the more, I won't say famous, but more well-known critics of him, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the biggest critique that they had was he was just flat out misreading Hebrew. And one thing I saw during my research is one of his old friends, and my impression was it's probably one of the guys that he would bounce a lot of this stuff off of just to make sure he was correct, was Samuel Noah Kramer. And so I guess when he was starting to read these things and starting to kind of get an understanding of what these tablets were saying, was he doing that? Was he bouncing them off people that were biblical experts, or was it more just kind of as he's reading more and more and getting more comfortable with it, he's able to kind of take what he knows of the Hebrew language, which is an offshoot of some of those ancient languages, and then just kind of work it into the meaning of the tablets?
Well, Hebrew was his primary language, so that's what he grew up with. That was really his first language. I mean, he was 5 years old when they moved from the Soviet Union to Tel Aviv, but the family was Jewish. They were from a shtetl in Ukraine. I'm sure they spoke. They probably spoke Russian, but they also spoke Yiddish, and to Israel they spoke Hebrew. So that's really his main language, was Hebrew. I mean, he's in English also, but for him that was his first language. So for him to be able to read Hebrew, even though ancient Hebrew is a little different than modern Hebrew, I don't think there was any real issue there with him understanding Hebrew and interpreting that. And that was kind of the basis with knowing one Semitic language. It was easy to learn others. That's something that I've heard him say. Now, I know he had all kinds of people that he would reference and collaborate with, and some were willing to put their names on things and some could not because they were in academia or some government and really didn't want any publicity, or they were afraid for their academic careers if they said they believed in aliens. So a lot of these topics, but he collaborated with many, many people in every subject that he talked about. And he didn't write anything if he didn't have references and facts and proof. And it's one of the things in the beginning of the 12th Planet, he's giving like, here's proof, and here's proof, and here's proof, and here's proof. And actually his publisher had told him, 3 or 4 items is enough. You don't need 10. So he really, throughout his lifetime and all of his writing, he didn't write anything unless he could have facts behind it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's good to hear, because, and especially if people have any interest in this topic of kind of the ancient alien theory and just the ancient cultures and the unmistakable fact that whether it was aliens or not, somewhere a long time ago there was a highly advanced civilization, and it's good to hear that, because the mainstream just kind of offhandedly, and you see it in today's world. I mean, anything that doesn't fit with the orthodoxy of the mainstream, it's offhanded as conspiracy theory, or it's he made it up, or whatever the critique is. It's nothing more than just he's a cartoon character. Don't pay attention to him anymore. And you see, I mean, right now, you see people like Graham Hancock, Lawrence Gardner, who had wrote a bunch of great books about sort of the world before the Bible, and Lawrence was definitely no fan of the Catholic Church in my view from reading his books. But also Robert Schoch, who the geologist who said that the Sphinx is probably 10,000 years old. And of course, the mainstream media or the mainstream academia, Egyptologists, all those people just poo-poo it as if he was a cartoon character. But if you listen to them and you actually read what they're saying, it really makes a really good argument.
Right.
So talk a little bit about some of the because this is actually very interesting, because I was in Egypt probably 10 years ago, and when you're there and actually touching the Great Pyramids, it's hard to believe the mainstream. Yeah, when you're actually there and you actually touch these monuments, it's you can't help but think that there's something else going on here. And so he spent a lot of his time, as he was getting more and more popular, actually taking groups on trips throughout the world. Talk a little bit about those.
So I really wish I had known about them before he stopped doing them, because he did take groups all over the place. So he had in his books, pictures and diagrams, and talked about items that were in particular museums, but he started taking groups to go and see them, because there's nothing like seeing the actual artifacts to understand. So there's he had trips to Israel and to Egypt and to I'm trying to remember not to Iraq and Iran, but to Turkey and to some other places like that, to Baalbek in Lebanon. So the one in Baalbek is particularly interesting, not just the trip, but he also took to South America and Central America to see items. But in Baalbek, there's an area there that has, it looked to my uncle like it might have been a place where rockets were blasted, basically a launching pad. And there were some monolithic stones that were part of that whole surrounding area. There are the walls around one area are kind of charred, like from emissions from the rocket taking off. And then a couple miles away, there's a quarry where one of the types of stones that was used in that foundation for the structure in Baalbek is partially quarried. And it has, it's perfectly rectangular, and it is huge. It is, these stones that were quarried in this location, we don't have technology today to move them, let alone what they had at the time that the structures in Baalbek were built. But he had his entire group that he took with him on that trip lined up in front of this stone that's partially quarried. And it's huge, and you can really see the proportion when you see the whole group in front of it, because it was a large group of people. I don't know if it was just the group that he took or other tourists that were there at the time that lined up for the picture, but they are not even, they're probably the tallest person. It's maybe 4 times taller than they are. And it's just humongous for them to, so seeing something like that and actually understanding that moving these stones, quarrying them, squaring them, moving them to another location that is that far away, placing them perfectly to the point that you don't need any mortar in between them. These kinds of technologies that ancient people had, we don't have it today. So it was eye-opening to see things like that on those kinds of trips.
Yeah, I think they call those the 3 titans or something like that, the 3 monolithic stones that are in the base of Baalbek. And what I find fascinating, and I think I heard this either on his lecture that he gave about why Jerusalem is the center of the world, because underneath the Western Wall, where they've excavated over the past, they find those monolithic, humongous rocks that are very similar in size to Baalbek. And so now people are starting to think, I'm sure, out there, oh God, aliens, rocket ships 10,000 years ago, whatever. Think about this. I mean, when you watch NASA move a shuttle or move one of the rockets into place to their liftoff pad, that whole complex is concrete. So it's like moving a humongous pad to where the launch is going to take place. So, I mean, it gets you thinking. At the very least, it should get you kind of thinking to look into, what's going on over there. And yeah, it's I find that fascinating. And Baalbek, for everybody out there, it's actually currently famous because I believe it was an old Roman temple of Apollo, or temple of one of the largest Roman temple complexes outside of Rome is Baalbek, and that's kind of what it's known for now. But like you're talking about, all you got to do is just go under the surface just a little bit, and you realize that this thing, the Romans probably came across a massive stone complex and then decided to build on top of it, which kind of gets into the whole idea of Zacharia, and why I think he is so important is just take the Catholic or the Bible, the Old Testament, and those stories are taken from previous cultures. And that's a part of it that really kind of fascinates me. When he was alive, did Zacharia, were there a lot of people that were critics that were publicly, critiquing and criticizing and trying to debunk what he was saying? And while that was going on, was there anybody that was successful, or was his research was it able to stand up to that critique?
So I think his research was able to stand up to the critique. There are some naysayers, and I can only assume what their motives are for doing it, maybe to get their own kind of notoriety about all of this. But in general, I don't think anybody was really successful. Some of the arguments that others have used have many holes in them, more holes than you can put into my uncle's theories and say, but I think the naysayers have more issues with their arguments than my uncle does. So he never responded to those folks. I mean, he basically felt like he had plenty to do without worrying about them. And you always know that there's going to be people out there criticizing anything that you do. You do something, something that nobody can say is not a good thing, and somebody's going to say it's not a good thing. Right. So, that's just the way people are. So he didn't really worry about his critics. He didn't have anybody legitimate in science or who would have been in a position to know these things say it's not true. It's not like he had NASA saying, no, we've seen aliens and they're not what you're saying, or we've never seen anything that looks like an alien to us. I mean, because there were people in NASA and other government programs and Jesuit monks who are researching and have telescopes and all kinds of things. And there was a lot of interest between the Vatican and NASA and so many different kinds of credible organizations to worry about the few people who wanted internet fame by saying he was wrong.
Yeah, and just refresh my memory. What year did he die?
He died in 2010. So it's been 10 years now.
Gotcha. And I tell you, a lot has changed in those. I mean, a lot has changed in the last 3 years. I would say.
Right.
I mentioned these guys before. You know, Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch, Lawrence, who's now dead. And just the whole concept of aliens and UFOs is kind of starting to become mainstream. I mean, just recently, the biggest ones would have been those two Navy jet pilots who have it on video seeing something that they don't know what it was. And so it seems like there's a lot of people, and again, these guys are not your mainstream academia. These are researchers that have written books and have spent decades in their research, and they're legitimate. And so it's starting to, it would be interesting to see what Zacharia would think of all of the stuff that's going on right now, because in his book, Genesis Revisited, he kind of talks about that, but that was 20 years ago. Now think of everything that's happened since then in terms of, what we're seeing. So I find it very interesting. And that's kind of one of the biggest things. I just want to understand what his thought process was while he was putting this out there, knowing full well that it was going to get panned by everybody. But it seems like it's, and again, in the book Genesis Revisited, the main kind of subject of the book is science is just seeing these things, in particular, how the universe was made. That astronomers are starting to just kind of, over the last probably 10, 15, 20 years, just starting to kind of come up with these ideas of how the universe was made. And they all seem like they're in line with what the Sumerian cuneiform tablets were saying that were written 6,000 years ago. So it's definitely, it makes me think, and hopefully it makes other people think. So we'll see. But so what, in terms of his research, are you finding, is it, especially in light of everything that we're kind of seeing recently, are you seeing, is there a renewed interest in his work, or is it more still kind of a little bit off to the side?
I think there's always been a core of interest in his work. There are readers that are very interested and keep the topic alive. There was just in Italy a commemorative program. I don't know if they had it in person because of COVID or it was all virtual, but there's a very large group of Italian readers that are very interested in this and have groups there. There are Facebook groups that discuss all the topics. I don't know if there's other groups around the world. I imagine there are. Those are ones I know about. I'm still, like I said, webmaster of Sitchin.com, although it's not a very active site, but I get emails from around the world. His books are continuing to be published in different languages around the world. And as I said, even the 12th Planet still being in print for about 40 years now is really pretty amazing. Most people in publishing will tell you that books stay in print for 10 years. And that's about it. So that they're continuing to print the original book as well as all the follow-up books and the other books in the Earth Chronicles is truly amazing. And then I get from the publisher samples of books in all kinds of languages. So there was a Portuguese edition of some of the more recent books, and there was Japanese and Thai and German and I don't know. So, some of them I have to look at there's usually a website in the book somewhere there that tells me if I look at the URL, I can potentially tell what country it was translated, because sometimes I can't read the language. if it's in some sort of, Asian script or Cyrillic or something like that. I'm not really certain what country it's coming from. But the books are still in print and it's still very active. And I think there's increased interest. And I actually think that right now, there's so many things that have come to light and that are being made public about these topics that I really think that we're getting to a point where there is increased interest in this topic, not less.
Yeah. Well, now, what are some of the other works that he did that maybe weren't necessarily published as books? Is there anything else that he was doing that kind of would have made a good book? Or
so he had, when he passed away, there were a few scripts that he had put together. One was published as a novel, The King Who Refused to Die, which was based on the Gilgamesh story. I mean, most of the book, there was a little bit in the front and the end that weren't part of the main story, but really telling dramatically the story of Gilgamesh. He had a few other things, some articles that had been unpublished, and some of those were what we included in the Anunnaki Chronicles, which was the book that I edited, and it was a sampling of chapters from many of his books, and also some of those unpublished articles. That was the first place where they appeared. Yeah. So there are a few other things like that. There's trip notes from the many trips that he led, and I'm looking to potentially do something with that, because it really does have notes like, we're going to this museum and there are these artifacts, and take a look at these, and this is, so I think I'd like to do something with those to make them available to people, because I think that would be fascinating to be able to go to museums and look at these things. It's not the same as those who got to go with Zacharia, because there was just so much there, but I think this is still something else that's of value that we might be able to do with what he's put together.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that caught my attention when I was reading the introduction to that Anunnaki Chronicles, you talk about him, Zacharia, being one of only 200 people who could read the cuneiform language. I would assume that was at the time. I mean, obviously,
right.
Yeah. Now, I mean, one of the guys in that documentary. And I don't remember his name, but he was the one that studied at the University of Chicago, I think, under...
Right, or Barry Baumgartner. So he mentioned that he had taken some courses at the University of Chicago. They're available in person and online, and you can learn how to read cuneiform.
Interesting. So the University of Chicago that must be in their, ancient culture or ancient civilization department or history department, but...
Yeah, I don't really know, but I think it's worth looking at. And another sad thing about COVID right now is universities are struggling, and they are retiring some classes and majors. So maybe we need to make sure that we go and look for that class so that they don't take it away. So, I don't know that they're affected in that way, or that this would be what they would choose. But I think if there's a resurgence of interest, that would be great.
Yeah. As we're talking, I'm just kind of thinking back on my time in Iraq. And someday I would love is probably too strong. Someday I would like to go back and see the famous museum in Baghdad, because apparently that housed some of the most amazing artifacts from that area. And I remember when I was over there in 04 and 05, we were flying down in the southern part of the country, and we were coming back to where we were based out of, right outside of Fallujah and Ramadi. But we had to fly basically up through the ancient city of Babylon. And what Saddam had done, I don't know if they were the original walls or he redid the walls, but they were painted blue with the gilded lions painted on the side. I mean, it looks just like the images that you would see from Babylonian times. And it didn't occur to me back then how where I was until 15 years later, after reading all this stuff and just kind of researching it, that it was right there. And it's that part of the country is, when we were leaving Babylon, which unfortunately just now is a fuel depot, or it was 15 years ago, run by the Polish army. Once you left there heading north towards Baghdad, it was palm trees as far as the eye could see. It was so lush. It was hard to imagine that you were still in the desert. But as soon as you left that kind of band, it was just a wasteland. But I remember the blue painted brick walls around Babylon that Saddam had built a palace right there. So it's fascinating because that everybody talks about the Sumerians, call it 4,000 BC, so 6,000 years ago, as sort of the cradle of civilization. And that's kind of where Zacharia was focused on. But what I find interesting, and I wish he would have been alive to kind of see this, a lot of the things that we're finding now in places in Turkey like Göbekli Tepe and things like that, that they're saying it goes back even further, which probably even lends more credence to what he was talking about.
Right. So, I mean, his original, the stories that the ancient people wrote about the Anunnaki, this all really centered in that area. Iraq is the area between the Tigris and Euphrates River. It is where civilization began, and they considered the cradle of civilization or the navel of civilization. And the Persian Gulf is where the Anunnaki first arrived. So the ancient stories, what they talk about is that there were problems on this 12th planet. It's actually, well, 10th planet really, because they were counting the sun and the moon as heavenly bodies there. So the 10th planet in our solar system that got pulled in from another solar system into ours. It has an elliptical orbit that goes around the sun every 3,600 years. And they were having trouble with their atmosphere. And they were also, so the ruler of Nibiru, which is the name of that planet, was deposed because of the issues with the atmosphere and not being able to solve them. And so he was fearful for his life, and he took off in his kind of personal spaceship and landed in other places also. But he ended up, really because of problems with his spaceship, he ended up coming through the asteroid belt, which was pretty dangerous, and landing in the Persian Gulf. And when he landed there, he discovered that there was gold in the Persian Gulf, and you could sift through the waters and get some. And they were using gold particles to repair their atmosphere. So one of the other things that's very unique around every ancient culture, every culture on Earth, is the value of gold and the importance of gold. And why gold? Why not silver? Why not something else but gold? And it's because it was important to the Anunnaki. So he found gold there, and he thought, oh, I can go back and be a hero. And so he managed to communicate, or maybe he went back. I'm not clear on those details, but he let the people on Nibiru know that he'd found gold, and they sent, really it was astronauts, but they sent a group of people to explore, and they created they called it a home in the faraway, which was Erech and Ur, and those are cities that were in that area near the Persian Gulf, and they started looking for gold, and they found that it was really not a lot of gold, or it was more effort than it was worth with the gold that was in the Persian Gulf. And they started looking other places, and they found in the southern parts of Africa a lot of gold, and they started mining it. And the mining of that gold was hard work, and you're telling astronauts to mine gold. So it's like, it's like, this is not the work that we were signed up for. Yeah. So they protested, and so they decided that they needed to do something else. And there had been in ancient times, and there's stories in Sumerian and Babylonian creation myths that talk about collisions between the planets in ancient times. So there was common genetic material on Earth, and although the life on Nibiru had advanced much more rapidly than on Earth, there were hominids on Earth then. So they started doing genetic engineering to try to see if they could create an intelligent worker. And it didn't really work until they started mixing their own DNA through artificial means in genetic engineering, mixing their own DNA with that of the hominids, and they created the atom, or mankind. So they were using mankind as these intelligent workers. And I know some authors have called them slaves. I don't really think of them that way, as more as workers, but that's how we came to be. And we look like them. They look like us. They're taller than us, but we look like, you know, we are, when you talk about in the Bible where it says we're made in God's image, we're in the same image as the Anunnaki. So this is really what the purpose was with them being on Earth, was to get gold in order to repair their atmosphere. And there were other things they liked about Earth. They thought it was a little crazy because for us, for them with a 3,600 year, 1 year being 3,600 years, for them, this was a crazy planet. It was constantly blinking night and day, night and day, night and day, when compared to their time. And because, and this is a little bit metaphysical, but when you start looking at time in space, and you say 3,600 years is one of our years, or one of their years is 3,600 of ours, they seem to be immortal. You know, we are changing over in the generations, and they're not aging. And it's not that they're immortal, it's just that they have great longevity compared to us. So
and just so you guys know out there, she's not just making this stuff up. This is what Zacharia was translating from ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets.
Right. So
that's what the whole Earth Chronicles, the 12 planet books are all about. It's just, at the very least, it'll make you think. It'll make you kind of say, hey, you know, maybe there is something to this. Who knows? And that's what I find. That's what I find fascinating is out there. There are these areas in the world, and getting back to what you just said about gold, that was one of the other things. So when I first started questioning everything, when I got back 15 years ago, a couple things that came to my mind. Why Jerusalem? Why do all the Earth's, or the three major religions on Earth, why are they fighting over that one part of the Earth? That was fascinating. The only explanation I've heard that actually makes sense to me is the ancient alien theory of Jerusalem. Same goes with gold. You know, right now in our modern world with fiat money, there's some talk from kind of fringe economists about going back to the gold standard because gold is only the real true value. I always questioned, I was like, why, like you said, why gold? What is the human being's fascination with gold, and why not something else? And when I read about why humans were, according to the cuneiform tablets, why they were made to mine the gold for their gods. Of course, the early humans are, you know, the gods are, if the gods need this, then somehow maybe that translates to the humans needing it and the humans' desire to have it, because gold, you know, beyond 200 years, the last 200 years beyond that, or further back, that was money. That was everything. That was that's what people were after, was gold. And why is that built into the human DNA that gold is valuable? So, and these are the only things that really kind of make me sort of, okay, that kind of makes sense. And I find that fascinating. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on here, just to kind of talk about this, because I think, like you said, it's starting to become more accepted maybe, and, you know, maybe, who knows, in the future, maybe his work start to really pick up steam again, and next thing you know, you've got a full-fledged website that you can, you know, that people are looking for resources.
right. Well, I mean, I really hope that that Zacharia gets some of the credit for for some of these discoveries and being the pioneer in really the researching this as much. I mean, he wasn't looking to it for that,
Right.
although I think he did want a little bit of credit, but he wasn't, if you knew him, he was a very humble person. He wasn't really looking for that in this. He really just felt this was important information and he should share it. And that was his main goal. He always said, I'm not a writer, I'm a reporter. So he was writing what and bringing to a modern audience what the Sumerians and Babylonians and other ancient people, Assyrians, had written in ancient times on these ancient documents. And there's so many stories and so many cultures that really parallel each other. Even a group of 12 in the list of rulers, there were 12 of the highest rank of the Anunnaki. There were 12 Greek gods. There are 12 Roman gods. And you look at the personalities as they're described, they're the same people.
Yeah.
So, and they are not perfect. We call them gods with a small g. They didn't call themselves gods, but it's kind of what we ended up calling them. And they are, they are not exactly human, if you want to say, because if we're human and they're something else, but they have the same issues that we have. They have jealousies, they have sibling rivalry, they have all kinds of issues, but they've also solved some issues that we have. And there's a lot of things that they passed along when they gave us culture and they gave us our own kingship on earth to start ruling ourselves, and all kinds of things that there was wisdom in what they passed on as far as a rule of law. One of the things that's really amazing in these ancient cultures is that out of nowhere, there's education, there is agriculture, there is technology, there is language, there is writing and mathematics, and all of these things came all of a sudden.
Yeah.
You look at the first of all of these, they all happened very quickly, and just a monumental leap of human capability and knowledge. And my uncle really felt that came because it was a cycle of the 3,600 years, and they were near us and they imparted this information to us. So these leaps and bounds of all of this was what they taught us. And the Sumerians say that everything we know that the Anunnaki taught us. So they had all kinds of issues and are not perfect beings, but they also had figured some things out and tried to share them with us.
And that goes with all the ancient, even the South American cultures were the same way, that somebody came from out there and brought all this stuff that we now, that's what allowed civilization to grow in those areas. So it's at the very least it makes you think. And one of the sort of what you were just talking about there, the idea of every 3,600 years, I think in Genesis Revisited, he talks, or I think it's the book End of Times or End of Days. They talk about 2012, the Mayan calendar ended. Everyone thought the world was going to end in 2012. Everyone thought 2000 was going to be crazy with the internet and the whole thing breaking down. We're still, I think basically at the end of the book, he says, we're still a couple hundred years away from that cycle rotating through. So,
right. And that's even at the earliest. So yes.
Yeah. And so it seems to me that science right now is starting to get to the point where all these things that we think of in vitro fertilization, we're starting to try to clone things right now. All these things that are modern miracles, they were written down in these cuneiform tablets, and that's what I find fascinating. And I would hope that anybody who has any curiosity would kind of look into that. And one of the things that I find fascinating in today's world. So you get a popular guy like Joe Rogan. Joe's podcast out there, it's got 10 million viewers, I think. And he is dipping his toe in this whole concept of UFOs and are they real? And you know, it's funny to watch these guys because whether it's ego or whether they can't actually go there and say that they think this is true, he's actually bringing it to people's attention that there's an alternative way of looking at things that, you know, and he brings up every time he has somebody on where they're talking about UFOs, inevitably Zachariah's name comes up, which is interesting. So is that, getting back to your point, you wish that he gets some kind of credit? It seems like he is, or are we kind of waiting for something else?
So, well, I think he would really love to see some more acceptance of these ideas instead of them still being sort of fringe. But yes, when I published the Anunnaki Chronicles, the publisher came to the Miami Book Fair, which is a very large book fair. It's really nice. And of course, I'm in the area, so I asked them, you know, should I come to the book fair? And they said, sure, why not? So, I mean, I'm not Zacharia, so it's not quite the same draw as if he was there. I'm sure it would have been amazing. But a few people did stop by, and I sat in the booth there for Inner Traditions, who is the publisher. And I looked at the table of all the books that were around on the table of books that they were selling, new books, and there were probably 20 books that wouldn't have been there without Zacharia, because they were people that took the ideas and took them a little further. So he gets recognition there. Almost all of them at least mention him. Some of them, I know some of the other people that are core readers of Zachariah's, he called them the inner circle. These are some of the friends that traveled with him on the tours that he gave and attended seminars that he used to do. So that group, some of them are kind of saying, well, gee, I don't really like it that those people are pretending that these ideas are theirs. Because obviously they have their own ideas too, and if they expand the concepts, but they're not necessarily saying where their thoughts started and the origin and giving credit. And so I guess I can't expect that from everything. I mean, not everybody's going to say, oh, Einstein said this, so I'm increasing, talking about physics and I'm putting it from here, because either they assume people know or it's not something they necessarily think of. So, but many of them do mention Zacharia and his theories, and they use that as part of a jumping off point to talk about the ideas that they're taking and expanding. And a few of them pretend that it's all their own, and that's what people take exception to.
That group, his inner circle, are they kind of still active together, and do you keep in touch with them, or is it more?
Yeah, I do. We've had a couple of reunions. You had mentioned the video that just was released. It's called, actually, I'm not sure the exact title of it, but it's a personal tribute and history of Zacharia. And it's available on the SitchinArchives.com, which is a site that's managed by the friend that created the video. But he interviewed us at our last reunion a couple of years ago for the folks that were able to attend and talk about the trips and talk about Zacharia. And so they're in the video, some of those people.
What do you think? What do you think they would say, or how do you think, in their minds, how do you think Zacharia would be handling everything that's going on in today's world? I mean, with all of the, the official kind of announcements and official declassification of information, what do you think?
I think he'd be very excited. Whenever there was something that corroborated something that he had written in his books, he was happy to see it. When Voyager had some views of Neptune and Uranus, and they matched the colors that the Sumerians said they were, and the Babylonians said they were the relative size and the color. One is blue-green and the other one's green-blue. And I was really curious when we recently went by Pluto, because Pluto was known as the House of Bright Waters. And there wasn't really much else that I found in my uncle's writings about what about Pluto, but there's ice on Pluto and it shines. And so maybe that's why it was bright waters.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that he wrote because the Sumerians wrote them, or the other ancient people. And he was always really thrilled when one of those things were rediscovered by science.
Fascinating. It's and like I said, it helps for somebody who's curious and just kind of wants to know the backstory of things and stuff that nobody really, or the mainstream doesn't really talk about. The Earth Chronicles has been a very interesting exercise in reading it, and just kind of trying to figure out how that interplays with my current view of the world, and I find it fascinating. And one of the it's funny. I've almost, without sounding kooky, I've almost become more spiritual and more of a believer in if there is a God out there, if there's something out there, after reading these sorts of things and after kind of researching and watching some of these shows. And they talk about that concept of the cargo cult, where during World War II, when the Allies were flying in the South Pacific, you had squadrons of airplanes flying over, dropping parachutes of supplies onto these otherwise uninhabited islands, and yet there are people on those islands, and they think that food is being dropped from the gods. And then when those airplanes land, they worship them as gods. And then when they leave after the war, it's well documented that they would build out of sticks little airplanes and put them where those big airplanes were landing in hopes that the gods would come back. And so, is that what we were thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago? I don't know, but it makes sense. And then I fast forward to now in 2020, with as advanced as humans are right now, how would we handle somebody coming out of a spaceship and saying, I made you thousands of years ago, you're my servant? I don't know how that would go down in today's world.
No, I think we'd be pretty skeptical and about all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have to be a major event, but if just someone quietly came down, no, we would just think they're a kook.
Yeah, it would have to be. Yeah, because I mean, the Catholic Church, their teaching is we are God's servants. But if that were to actually happen, would we accept that? I don't know. It's again, it makes you think about these things, and for me personally, I've actually really dove deep into all these things and kind of offshoots of it, just to kind of at least understand where all this stuff has been that I've grown up, being told to believe, where it actually is coming from.
Well, I know from my uncle, all of his research made him really believe in the veracity of the Old Testament. So, the stories there, he felt that if you took them literally, there was truth, they were history. And even you look at some other things, the myths, Greek and Roman myths, the story of Helen of Troy, they found Troy.
Yeah.
So some of these things, if we say that they're just myths and they're not really true, they're stories that the ancient people told, but we're finding out that they're truth.
Yeah.
So it made him, he was always, believer in God, but he really started believing that the Old Testament was truth. And the New Testament, we know, I really have not read much New Testament, but I know it's about the life of Jesus, and it was written by man. But the stories that are in the Old Testament were, a lot of them were kind of abbreviated versions of stories that people knew. So they didn't always go into elaborate detail, because it was really a story that you already knew. But the information there is, my uncle felt, was really truth, and it made him believe more than he ever had before, the more research he did. And what's interesting, in general, if we say that the Elohim which is plural, in the Old Testament, which means God, but it's plural. If we say that those might have been the Anunnaki, so there's a lot of concern, okay, well, if that's not God, who's God? And, is it blasphemous to say that that the gods that we talk about in the Bible is not really God, but they may be emissaries of God, and the Anunnaki believed in a creator of all. So it's not that they felt, oh, we're the creators, even if they did genetically engineer man. They were created by somebody, and they believed in a God or a creator of all. So maybe when we hear stories in the Bible about God, maybe in some cases it's the Anunnaki. And that's what my uncle felt, that a lot of those things might have been the Anunnaki. But if you can say that everything is planned by God, the fact that they were here and did what they did would have been God's will. So it doesn't, there are a lot of people that are very religious, whether they are Christians or Jews, rabbis and priests and the Vatican itself don't dismiss this as being something that's that they feel is outside the possibility. And when we think of God with a large G, it would be the creator of all, who the Anunnaki also believed in.
And it's funny because when I was growing up, Sunday school and all that sort of stuff, my view of creation of Earth was, when Jesus was born, so 2,000 years. And now you read about, this is 400, 500,000 years, billions of years.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult, I start to appreciate that, okay, this is huge. And looking at your back screen there, it's amazing. And so it just gets me thinking. And again, one of my biggest reasons for wanting to have you on was just to understand how he went about his projects, his research, because I do think that it has a lot of merit, and if anybody has any interest in it, it's a fascinating read. It really gets you thinking. So, well, listen, Janet, it was a pleasure. You know what? Let's do this before we close out. Is there anything kind of future in terms of the website or in terms of Zachariah's legacy and the people that are still kind of trying to keep it alive? Is there anything that are plans for the future that you might want to mention to people? Or
so it just came out within a few weeks, the video about Zachariah, and there's links on Sitchin.com to it, but it's available from the SitchinArchives.com, and some of his other videos that he's put out over the years are available for download from that other site as well. So I do want to mention that because it's something brand new, and I really think that the person that did the video did a great job with it.
And I agree. Yeah, it was a good way to get introduced to him. Absolutely.
Right. And as far as other works that are going on, I don't have anything else specific. I have some ideas, and I just need time to do them.
Gotcha.
So the website needs a lot of work, and if somebody's got ideas on content, I'm open to that. But I also try to keep with my uncle's wishes and legacy, and he really was very careful about what he put on there. And but there are a lot of exciting things that have been discovered recently or talked about recently. There is the video that you mentioned before that was released by I don't know, it was NASA or the Air Force, but of some fighter pilots and an unusual craft that they saw. That was actually pretty old footage, and I think my uncle knew about it, but it wasn't publicly available until a few months ago, really, that they released it.
Now that you say that, I think it was actually done, the incident actually happened in 2004. So yeah, your uncle would have been alive then.
Yeah, it was quite some time ago that he knew about it. There are other things like there seems to be scientific, they're thinking that there is another planet. Now, I still think of Pluto as a planet, so we're going to say it's a 10th planet, although with Pluto demoted, it's really number 9.
Yeah.
But they're seeing some things that make them think there's another large body planet at the in the Kuiper belt, beyond Jupiter and Pluto, and in that area. And what they're able to tell is really because of something blocking the view of stars, and they sort of blink because of the this other planet passing by. So they don't know a lot about it, but that's news that's been for 2 or 3, 4 years at least, that information's been out there about that. So there's a lot of things that are corroborating some pieces of this, and every day there's more of that kind of information available.
And it's interesting, going back to Joe Rogan and how popular he is. And, just when I watch it, I think he's, I don't necessarily know if he's, projecting how much he does believe in it. But the biggest thing that he says that makes him question everything is that picture of Zacharia with that famous scroll image, where they actually, in the corner of it, you see the sun and all the planets around the sun. So it's an accurate description of our solar system. And this thing is, 6,000 years old. So that's the one thing that he kind of hangs his hat on. He's like, how do they do that? And so he leaves it as an open question, but if anybody wants to delve deeper into where the answers come from, the 12th Planet and the Earth Chronicle books are definitely would definitely help you kind of point you in that direction. So, well, listen, Janet, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Hey, and I'll end it with like this. If you're in the military, the police departments or the fire departments, the first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. Janet Sitchin, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, guys, this is the Rain Man. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, Observations on the World We Live In. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.